The night my daughter-in-law told me I could either make myself useful or find somewhere else to stay, I didn't say a word. I just looked at her for a moment, long enough to make sure I'd heard her right. And then I went back to washing the dishes I'd already been washing when she walked in. She left the kitchen without another word. I heard her heels on the hardwood, then the bedroom door closing down the hall. I stood there at the sink with my hands in the water, and I thought, so that's where we are. My wife passed away 18 months before that night. Congestive heart failure. We'd been married for 31 years, and she was the kind of woman who kept the house warm just by being in it. When she died, the warmth didn't go with her all at once. It went slowly, like heat leaving a room through a crack under the door. By the time I sold the house in Tucson, the house where we'd raised our son, where we'd had Christmas dinners and summer barbecues and all of it, the cold had already settled into me pretty deep. My son, Nathan, called me 2 months after the funeral. He and his wife, Courtney, had a place in Phoenix. 4 bedrooms, 2 kids under 8, a backyard with a pool Nathan never cleaned. He said it made sense for me to come stay with them. He said the kids missed me. He said I shouldn't be alone in that big house with all those memories. I believed him. That was the first mistake. The second mistake was selling the house. My realtor got me $412,000 for it. Good price for that market that year. I put the money into a money market account and told myself I'd figure out the next step when I was ready. Nathan said there was no rush. He said, "Dad, just come be with family." So I packed what fit in my truck and a small U-Haul trailer, and I drove to Phoenix. The room I stayed in was the one at the end of the hall, past the kids' bathroom. It had a queen bed and a window that faced the neighbor's wall. Courtney had put a candle on the dresser and fresh towels on the rack, and when I first arrived, she hugged me and said she was glad I was there. She meant it, I think. At least for those first few days. Nathan worked long hours at a civil engineering firm. He left the house before 7 most mornings and was rarely back before 6:30 in the evening. Courtney worked part-time at a dental office, Tuesday through Thursday. Their kids, my grandchildren, Bryce and Lily, were 7 and 5. Bryce had soccer twice a week. Lily had dance on Saturday mornings. I figured out within the first week how the arrangement was going to work. The first morning after I arrived, I woke up at 6 and made coffee. When Courtney came downstairs at 6:40, she seemed pleased to find a fresh pot waiting. She said, "Oh, you didn't have to do that." I said it was no trouble. She poured herself a cup, got the kids up, and left. The next morning I made coffee again. This time she also said, "Could you maybe scramble some eggs? I never have time before school drop-off." I scrambled the eggs. The morning after that she said, "Would you mind doing the school run? My back is killing me." I did the school run. By the end of the second week, I was making breakfast every morning, doing school drop-off 3 days a week, and picking up Bryce from soccer on Tuesdays. No one asked me directly. Things were just added, the way water finds a container. One morning there was a grocery list on the counter with my name on a sticky note at the top. Not a question, just a list. I went to the grocery store. I want to be honest about something. I didn't mind the helping, not at first. I'd spent my entire adult life doing things for people I loved. I was a high school shop teacher for 28 years in Tucson. I built furniture in my garage on weekends. I coached Little League for 11 seasons. Keeping busy felt like grief management. Feeling useful felt close enough to feeling needed, and feeling needed felt close enough, I thought, to being loved. That was a mistake too, one of the biggest ones. The weeks blurred. October became November. I was waking up at 5:45 now, because Courtney had mentioned in passing that it would be great if breakfast was ready by 6:15. I cooked breakfast, I cleaned the kitchen. I did 2 loads of laundry on Mondays and Thursdays. Not just my own, I want to be clear about that. The whole family's. I had tried once to only do my own things, and Courtney had come home from work to find a full hamper in the hallway and given me a look that I didn't know how to answer. So I did the laundry. Nathan, when he was home, was pleasant enough. He'd ask how my day was, watch TV with me for an hour after dinner, occasionally help me clean up from a meal I'd made. But there was something in the way he accepted all of it. The meals, the clean house, the kids dropped off and picked up. That told me he didn't really see it. It wasn't cruelty, it was just absence of attention. The kind of thing that happens when you grow up having things done for you, and never had to think about the machinery behind it. I started to make myself small. I'm not proud of that, but it's true. I stopped suggesting what to have for dinner. I stopped sitting in the living room when Courtney had her friends over. I ate early and went to my room. I told myself I was being considerate. I think, looking back, I was trying to take up so little space that no one would resent me for being there. It didn't work. The dinner party happened in early December. Courtney was hosting 8 people from her dental office. A holiday thing, she said. A small get-together. She asked me 2 weeks in advance if I would cook. She said, "You know I'm not good in the kitchen, and the kids love your brisket." I said yes. I spent 3 days planning the menu. Brisket, roasted vegetables, a corn casserole I'd been making since the late 90s, apple pie from scratch. I bought everything myself. Didn't even ask to be reimbursed, though the groceries for that dinner ran close to $200. The day of the party, I was in the kitchen by 9 in the morning. I had the brisket in by 10. By 3 o'clock, the house smelled like something my wife would have been proud of. I set the table. I polished the good glasses that had been sitting unused in the cabinet. I put out the good napkins. By 5, I was cleaned up, changed into slacks and a button-down, and I came out to the kitchen to check on things. Courtney was in the dining room, rearranging the centerpiece. She looked up at me and said, with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes, "Oh, we were thinking you'd probably be more comfortable just eating in your room tonight. The guests don't really know you, and it might be a little awkward." I stood there for a moment. "I cooked the food," I said. "I know, and it looks amazing," she said. "We really appreciate it." She turned back to the centerpiece. I thought of 8 different things to say. I said none of them. I went to my room. I ate a sandwich I made from leftover brisket, and I sat on the edge of the bed and listened to the laughter coming from down the hall. Laughter around a table I had set. Eating food I had spent 3 days planning and $200 buying. And I thought about what my wife would have said if she could have seen me in that moment. She would have said, "Don't you dare sit in that room another night." The next morning, I called my financial advisor and had a conversation I should have had 2 months earlier. I had over $400,000 sitting untouched. The Phoenix housing market was expensive, but I wasn't looking to buy. I called a property management company and asked about furnished 1-bedroom apartments in a quieter part of the city, somewhere with a little greenery, somewhere I could have a garage. I found a place in a development near Scottsdale Road, in a complex with a small workshop space available to residents. Ground floor unit, 1 bedroom, a patio that got morning sun. The rent was $18.50 a month. For a man with $400,000 in savings and a pension from 28 years of public school teaching, that was manageable. More than manageable. I paid first, last, and security deposit over the phone. I didn't tell Nathan or Courtney. I had 3 weeks until the lease started. I kept cooking breakfast. I kept doing laundry. I drove Bryce to soccer on Tuesday. I watched Lily's school winter concert on a Thursday evening, and she spotted me in the audience and waved with her whole arm, and I thought, this is what I'm not leaving. The kids, not the arrangement. The laundry incident happened 8 days before I moved out. I came back from the grocery store on a Wednesday afternoon and found a pile of Nathan's clothes outside my bedroom door. Not inside a basket, just a pile on the floor, like someone had set it down and expected it to walk itself inside. Shirts, pants, socks. I stood in the hallway for a long moment looking at that pile. I picked it up, I carried it down to Nathan's room and put it on his bed, unfolded, exactly as I'd found it. Then I went and sat on my patio and called my old friend Gerald, who I hadn't spoken to in too long. We talked for 2 hours about nothing important, his bad knee, my late wife's tulip bulbs, which I'd given to a neighbor before selling the house, a fishing trip we'd taken this summer. We both turned 55. By the time we hung up, the sun had gone down, and I felt more like myself than I had in months. 3 days later, Courtney knocked on my door in the evening. She said, in a careful voice, that she'd noticed Nathan's laundry hadn't been done. I said I'd found it in the hallway and returned it to his room. She said, "I just thought, since you were already doing laundry," and I said, "I do my own laundry on Mondays and Thursdays. His laundry is his laundry." She looked at me the way people look at someone who has just said something they weren't expecting. Then she said, "Well, we're a household. We all pitch in." I almost laughed. I didn't. I just said, "Good night, Courtney," and I closed my door. The following Saturday morning, 6 days before I moved out, Nathan came into the kitchen while I was drinking my coffee. Not his coffee, which I'd stopped making automatically, just mine. He said, "Hey Dad, what's the plan today?" I said I was thinking of driving up toward Cave Creek, see some open country. He said, "Oh, I thought maybe you could watch the kids. Courtney and I want to go look at new patio furniture." I said, "I've got plans today." He looked at me the same way Courtney had. I finished my coffee and left. I moved out on a Tuesday morning while Nathan was at work and Courtney was at the dental office. The kids were in school. I left the room clean and the bed made. I left a note on the kitchen counter that said, "Moved into my own place. I'll send you the address. The kids are welcome whenever you'd like." I didn't write anything else. There was nothing else that needed to be said. My new apartment had south-facing windows and smelled like fresh paint. I spent the first afternoon putting together a bookshelf I'd bought the week before, the old-fashioned way, with my hands, without instructions, the way I'd taught kids to do it for 28 years. I grilled a steak on the patio that evening. I drank a beer I'd been saving and watched the sky go orange over the rooftops. I slept 8 hours that night without waking up once. The calls started the next morning. Courtney first, then Nathan, then Courtney again. By the end of the first week, I had 23 missed calls between the two of them. By the end of the second week, 31. The voicemails were a progression I recognized. Concern first, then confusion, then something that walked the line between apology and grievance. One of Nathan's messages said, "Dad, Bryce is asking where you went." I listened to that one 3 times. Then I texted Nathan directly, "Tell him I'll come to his game on Thursday. I'll pick him up, take him for ice cream after, and drop him off. Let me know if that works." It worked. I sat in those bleachers on a cold Thursday evening in January, and Bryce scored his first goal of the season. And he looked at the stands and found me with his eyes before he found anyone else. 7 years old and already knowing who to look for. I thought about that the whole drive to the ice cream place. I thought about how you can love people completely and still refuse to let them diminish you. How those two things don't cancel each other out. How maybe this took me longer to learn than it should have. The clearest way to show a child what love looks like is to show him what self-respect looks like. Gerald came down from Flagstaff the following weekend. We drove out toward the Superstition Mountains with no particular plan, stopped at a diner outside of Apache Junction, ate eggs and pie at a window table while the sun was still low. He asked how I was sleeping. I told him 8 hours, no interruptions. He raised his coffee cup and said, "To that." We drove back in the afternoon with the windows cracked and the radio on, and I don't think either of us said more than a dozen words the whole way. But it was the best afternoon I'd had in close to 2 years. Nathan and I talked, eventually. A real conversation, not a voicemail. He drove over on a Sunday afternoon, sat at my kitchen table, looked around at the apartment, at the bookshelf I'd built, at the tools hung on the pegboard in the corner, at the framed photograph of his mother I'd placed on the windowsill, and he was quiet for a while. Then he said, "I didn't know it was like that." I said, "I know you didn't." He said, "I should have." I said, "Yes, but we're here now." We didn't hug. We're not really huggers, the two of us. But he stayed for dinner, and we ate at the table and talked about his mother, about the house in Tucson, about the summer we'd put in the patio together when he was 17 and complained the whole time, and then was absurdly proud of it when it was done. I told him I had the patio photo in a box somewhere. He said he wanted a copy. He left at 8:30. Before he went, he stood in the doorway and said, "I'm glad you found a good place." I said, "Me too." He nodded once and went to his car. I watched the taillights until they turned out of the parking lot. I went inside and washed the 2 dinner plates and the 2 glasses and set them in the drying rack. Then I turned off the kitchen light and stood in the dark for a minute, listening to the quiet. The refrigerator hum, a car somewhere outside, wind against the window. I'd spent 31 years sharing a house with someone I loved, then a year and a half learning how to be without her. Then 4 months letting grief trick me into shrinking until I fit in a room at the end of a hallway that wasn't mine. But here's what I know now. Grief is not a reason to hand yourself over. The people who love you won't ask you to disappear. And if you find yourself going quiet at your own table, doing laundry that isn't yours, eating alone in a room while strangers laugh over a meal you made, that's not family. That's a service arrangement nobody agreed to out loud. I don't hold it against them. I've thought about it enough to know that Nathan didn't choose cruelty. He chose comfort, and I was there to provide it. And he didn't look closely enough to see what it was costing me. That's not the same as malice, but it's also not something I was willing to keep paying for. My name is Thomas. I'm 62 years old. I live in a 1-bedroom apartment with good morning light and a garage where I'm slowly building a workbench I don't need but want. I have dinner with my son once a month. I see my grandchildren on Saturdays when Bryce has soccer. Lily showed me last week how she can do a cartwheel, and she made me watch 4 times in a row, to make sure I was paying attention. I was paying attention, I always was.